Hello everyone, I'm Lao Gao. Today we're going to talk about a very famous urban legend, the 8-year-old man. This urban legend appeared about 15 years ago on a Japanese forum called Loach. On August 26, 2008, someone shared a personal horror experience on that forum. The poster said that his grandparents lived in the countryside in a very beautiful and pleasant environment. Since his home was about a 2-hour drive away, he used to visit his grandparents during holidays. Later, when he was in high school, he got his motorcycle license and it became more convenient for him to ride his motorcycle to visit them. However, the last time he went was more than 10 years ago, when he was in his second year of high school. He explained that the reason he hadn't visited his grandparents in over a decade wasn't because he didn't want to, but rather because he was too afraid or unable to go. Let's go back to more than 10 years ago, when he was in his second year of high school and visited his grandparents for the last time. It was during his spring break, and after arriving at his grandparents' house, he stayed alone in the yard, sitting on the stone steps. Even though it was just the beginning of spring and the air was still a bit chilly, he mentioned that the stones in the yard were warmer than the sunlight, so he really enjoyed sitting there to relax, while he was enjoying the warmth of the yard. Suddenly, during that warm moment, he heard a sound coming from around him. A boo-boo-boo sound. He stated that he had never encountered such a sound previously, and he wasn't entirely certain if it was a buh or a puh. He noted that it was somewhere in between these two sounds, and it wasn't a mechanical noise, but rather akin to a sound produced by a person just boo-boo-boo, not mimicking anything. It was this sound. After being attracted by it, he immediately started looking for the source. He was sitting in a courtyard, and as he followed the sound with his eyes, he noticed a hat moving along the top of the courtyard wall. What it meant was that outside the courtyard wall, there was possibly a person wearing a hat, but you couldn't see the person, only the hat on top of their head. The person was walking outside the wall, and the hat was higher than the wall, so it looked as if the hat was moving on its own. However, what was exceedingly strange and made him quite nervous was the fact that the courtyard wall was approximately 2 meters in height. Under normal circumstances, whether it was a vehicle or a person moving outside the wall, it would be impossible to see it from within the confines of the courtyard. Yet he happened to observe this hat, which was moving along the top of the wall, and he continued to watch it intently. The dense and thick bushes made it impossible to see beyond them, but occasionally there would be a gap, a small space between the trees. When the hat moved into this gap, he was able to see outside, and he discovered that it was indeed a woman. From a considerable distance, he was unable to see the face distinctly. He only observed an individual donned in white attire. However, the person's height appeared to be over 2 meters, which genuinely frightened him because under normal circumstances, there wouldn't be someone like that. Numerous thoughts raced through his mind at that moment. Was this individual standing on something, or was it a man disguised as a woman? But that wouldn't account for the extraordinary height. The person beyond the courtyard wall seemed to glance inside and then continued moving, getting obscured by the dense bushes again, and he could only see the hat. The hat gradually vanished, as if the person was walking away, and that sound, the bo-bo-bo sound, initially moved along with the person, and as the hat disappeared, the bo-bo-bo sound gradually faded away as well. After witnessing this unbelievable phenomenon, he immediately went back inside the house and told his grandparents, "Grandpa, Grandma, I saw a very tall woman outside the yard. Her hat was visible over the yard wall, probably over 2 meters high. I couldn't tell if it was a man or a woman wearing white clothes, and I heard them making a ba-ba-ba-ba sound." As soon as he said this, his grandparents immediately stopped what they were doing. His grandpa grabbed his arm and asked, "What did you just see?" "Is it something over 2 meters tall, dressed in white, making a bobo sound, right?" He said, "Yes, that's right." At this point, his grandfather glanced at his grandmother and immediately turned to go to another room to make a phone call. He remembered that his grandmother didn't say anything at the time but was trembling, saying the atmosphere in the house suddenly became very frightening. After finishing the call, his grandfather told him, "It's already late today, don't go home, just stay here, I'll call your father." Then he turned to his grandmother and said, "Keep an eye on him, I'm going to find so-and-so." After saying that, he went outside, got in the car, and left. The narrator felt very anxious. "So, what exactly happened?" Grandma replied, "It's nothing, really. What you saw might be what's called the 8 feet tall." This was the first time the speaker heard of it. Then, his grandma explained what the 8 feet tall means. It's said to be a local ghost, a female about 8 feet tall, hence the name. 1 foot is roughly 30 centimeters, so 8 feet is about 2.4 meters, tall enough to be seen over the hedges on their courtyard wall. The 8 feet tall has 2 main traits, wearing white clothes and making a bo-bo-bo-bo sound. Nevertheless, the manifestation of the 8 feet tall is not entirely definite. Up to this point, in the surrounding region, a significant number of individuals have reportedly encountered her. Some claim she appears as a youthful woman, others describe her as an aged woman, and some suggest she is a woman of middle age. Regardless, the accounts differ, but the consistent detail is that she is a female, exceeding 2 meters in height, adorned in white garments, and emitting a bobo sound. Regarding her general appearance, she bears a resemblance to Sadako from The Ring, but unlike Sadako, her face is not necessarily obscured. It does not possess long hair obscuring the face, yet it does don a hat, which is a distinguishing characteristic. The most terrifying aspect is that every individual who has encountered the 8 feet tall entity has either vanished or passed away a few days afterward. Within the village, there have been occurrences where someone observed this figure at a bus stop, returned to report seeing such a person, and then, a few days later, they either disappeared or inexplicably died. Moreover, most of the people who have died are young men, and those who have seen it are also men. According to my grandmother, the last time they heard about the appearance of the 8 feet tall in the village was 15 years ago. It seems to appear approximately every decade or so. To prevent this entity from going out and causing harm in various places, their village has placed a Jizo statue at the border with a neighboring village in the north, south, east, and west directions. Essentially, they have created a barrier to seal the 8 feet tall within the village. From this perspective, it seems that the 8 feet tall cannot be eliminated, and they might not know how to destroy it. However, they know that using the Jizo statues can seal it within this area, which is equivalent to sacrificing this village to ensure peace for the entire region. Due to the presence of the 8 feet tall entity, most of the young people have left the village, leaving only the elderly. The 8 feet tall entity is not likely to harm the elderly, so they are safe living there. It is said that the village is willing to create this barrier. They also use this as a condition for exchange with the neighboring village, meaning there is some mutual benefit exchange. In other words, the surrounding villages might provide some benefits to this village. Locally, there are also people who specifically handle the matter of the 8 feet tall. If a young person encounters the 8 feet tall, there are actually ways to resolve it, so his grandfather went to find this person. After a while, when his grandfather returned, accompanying him was an elderly woman. As soon as this elderly woman entered, she presented the host with a talisman, then proceeded to go upstairs with her grandfather. She resided in a standalone 2-story residence, and they ascended to the 2nd floor. The host admitted that initially she was somewhat skeptical about what her grandmother had mentioned regarding the 8-foot-tall lady. However, after this elderly woman arrived and observing the entire family being so earnest, it caused her to feel somewhat anxious. Then, after a short while, after the arrangements upstairs appeared to be finalized, his grandfather escorted him to the upper floor. Upon reaching the upstairs area, his grandfather guided him into a specific room. As soon as he stepped into the room, he felt extremely frightened. The room's windows were made of glass, yet they were entirely covered with newspapers, thoroughly obstructing any view of the outside. Furthermore, every wall and the ceiling were adorned with talismans, identical to the ones the elderly woman had provided him earlier. In the center of the room, there was a wooden box placed on the floor, and atop the box rested a Buddha statue. In each of the 4 corners of the room, there was a plate filled with salt. Then his grandfather, with a very serious demeanor, informed him that from this moment until the break of dawn, he must absolutely not leave the room. They would not enter or communicate with him, and if anyone attempted to speak to him, he should not respond. He must hold onto the talisman in his hand and ensure it remains by his side at all times. If anything occurs, he should refrain from calling for them. Instead, he should simply remain close to the Buddha statue. Subsequently, the grandmother brought in some delectable food into the room and also set up a makeshift toilet inside, indicating she truly couldn't leave the room that entire night. The narrator felt extremely anxious and inquired, "Is it alright if I watch TV?" The elderly woman affirmed, and then the grandparents securely locked the door. The narrator felt somewhat frightened and bored, so they promptly turned on the television, deciding it would be best to concentrate on the TV. They continued watching until they eventually drifted off to sleep, and upon awakening it was already late at night. The television was displaying a late-night program, and the current time was shown on the screen. It was past 1 in the morning in the 1990s, and the main character was still a high school student. At that time, there were no cell phones. The main character was feeling very frustrated about waking up so early, when suddenly he heard something tapping on his window. His window was on the 2nd floor, and he was sure that the sound wasn't from a stone hitting the window, but rather it sounded very much like a knuckle tapping on the window. Thud. There was a persistent knock-knock sound on the glass window. The individual promptly increased the television volume because they were eager to drown out that unsettling sound. Then unexpectedly, they heard a voice from outside the door calling out, "Are you okay? Is everything all right?" The voice closely resembled that of their grandfather's. "If you're scared, just come out." The host was indeed a bit scared at that moment and immediately got up to go out, but then he suddenly remembered that it wasn't like he wouldn't speak to me, and he wouldn't let me go out. At this moment, he felt that the voice talking to him sounded both like his grandfather and not quite like his grandfather, which made his hair stand on end. When he looked down at his hair, he noticed that the salt in the corner of the wall had turned black. In Japanese religious tradition, specifically Shinto, colors are believed to have purifying and exorcising effects. Therefore, typically, if a Japanese household practices Shinto, they might place some salt at the entrance to prevent evil spirits from entering. He would customarily place a modest quantity of salt at the entranceway to ward off any malevolent spirits from entering the household. It is also fairly common to position salt on the windowsill. You might have noticed during sumo wrestling matches, the wrestlers scatter salt on the ring to purify the area. When the salt turns black, it indicates the presence of something exceedingly sinister. Once the entire salt becomes blackened, it loses its effectiveness as it becomes contaminated. Upon noticing the salt turning black, he began hearing sounds emanating from outside the door. Pop. The persistent sound continued, and the knocking on the window had not ceased. Thus, within the confines of the room, there was the incessant sound of knocking on the window, the popping noises, and the blaring noise emanating from the television. The host was so utterly terrified that he immediately knelt down in front of the Buddha statue, clutching a talisman in his hand, and began fervently chanting, "Help me! Help me! Help me!" In his state of heightened tension, he lost all sense of time, and the host mentioned he either drifted off to sleep or fainted. He was uncertain. Upon awakening once more, it was already daylight, and he observed the television displaying the time as 7:13, confirming that it was indeed morning. The popping noises and the persistent knocking on the window had finally ceased, and the corners of the walls had turned black. Since it was already light, he got up, nervously walked to the door, opened it, and found his grandparents standing there, waiting for him to come out. They didn't dare to speak to him, as talking might make him even more hesitant to emerge. Upon seeing him, his grandmother began to weep and exclaimed, "That's wonderful, that's wonderful." Then he noticed his father downstairs. His father explained that he had already arrived the previous night after being informed by the grandfather about the events that had transpired. Everyone observed a few individuals in the yard whom they did not recognize. After he emerged from the house, everyone quickly urged him to proceed downstairs and into the yard, where they all got into a van. As previously mentioned, the individuals in the yard, his grandparents and the elderly lady from the previous day, all entered the van. The van was just sufficiently filled with 8 or 9 individuals surrounding him in the center. The old lady told him to close his eyes and not to open them at all. Then they started driving. He said, "I don't know why, but the more they told me to keep my eyes closed, the more I wanted to open them and take a look." He opened his eyes a little and glanced out the window, and what he saw was the woman in white. She was right outside the car window, moving along with the car. Then someone next to him noticed he had opened his eyes and scolded him, telling him to keep his eyes closed. He became even more anxious and kept his eyes tightly shut. At this particular moment, he began to hear fingers tapping on the car window, reminiscent of the tapping on the window from the previous day. Nevertheless, he mentioned that he didn't hear the pop, pop, pop sound. Everyone in the vehicle was too frightened to make any noise, except for the elderly lady who persistently recited a scripture repeatedly. After some time, the tapping on the car window ceased, and the elderly lady said, "It's all right now, it's all right." Then the van came to a halt, and after stepping out, she saw her father's car. Her father's car hadn't actually entered the village. At this moment, the old lady came over and said to her, "Let me see your talisman." She then remembered that she was holding something in her hand. Upon looking, she found that the talisman had turned completely black. The old lady said, "Theoretically there shouldn't be any problem, but just to be safe, I'll give you a new one," and handed her a new talisman. Her father then bowed to everyone who had come to send her off, and then took the child and left. On the way back, her father explained to her. He mentioned that, when his father was a young man, he also resided in this particular village and had heard tales of the 8 feet tall. Furthermore, one of his father's close friends tragically passed away during his youth because he had encountered the 8 feet tall, which led his father to strongly believe in its existence. His father explained that the 7 or 8 individuals who accompanied him were originally from this village, although they no longer reside there. Upon learning about this incident, they all hurried back to offer their assistance. Moreover, through his father's subsequent explanations, he discovered that it's not merely a matter of witnessing the 8 feet tall and then taking refuge in a house for a single night to resolve the situation. In principle, I have encountered the 8 feet tall man, and he will persistently haunt you until he ultimately takes you away. This implies that you either perish or vanish. The sole solution is to depart from this location, although leaving does not guarantee complete safety because the 8 feet tall man is presently sealed within this place. Without this seal, he could pursue you anywhere. That's the inherent nature of this entity. The reason he stayed at his grandfather's residence that night was because the 8 feet tall man typically manifests at night. It's uncommon for him to emerge during daylight hours, and it's said that during the day it is relatively safer. It might be somewhat manageable. For instance, if you carry some protective talismans, it won't come too close to you. However, during the nighttime, it's considerably stronger, and a few talismans might not suffice to stop it. So, the vehicle that brought him back was actually safeguarded by the individuals assisting him. They set up a protective barrier inside the car to make it challenging for the entity to enter. Since he has witnessed the 8 feet tall, it means he can never visit his grandfather's residence again. He mentioned that after returning home, he called his grandfather to inquire if he had said anything like, "If you're frightened, come out," that night. His grandfather said no, none of them did. They remained outside and refrained from speaking. Numerous years elapsed in this manner, and just as he was on the verge of forgetting about the incident, something unnerving occurred. His grandfather unexpectedly called one day to inform him that a Jizo statue in their village had been destroyed, which implied that the protective barrier might not be effective anymore. This made him anxious for a moment, but fortunately several more years went by without any incidents. Regrettably, his grandfather passed away 2 years ago, and he was unable to attend the funeral. The funeral? So, this post was originally made approximately 15 years ago, and after the poster shared this content, there were no additional updates provided. Subsequently, numerous internet users embarked on extensive investigations to discover the exact location of this village. Eventually, someone did manage to find it. They mentioned that there's a renowned island in Japan called Yakushima. Individuals who travel to Japan might have heard of it due to its World Natural Heritage Site. That around 90% of Yakushima Island is covered by dense forests, home to many ancient trees, famously called Jomonsugi. Among these trees, the oldest is thought to be over 7,000 years old, meaning it existed before human civilization, even predating ancient Sumerians. It's a famous experience, and if you ever get the chance to visit Japan, you should definitely try to see it. On Yakushima Island, there's a legend that closely resembles this story. However, she is not called the 80-year-old person, but rather Mountain Chicken in local legends. It is said that there is a very tall woman living in the forest, also dressed in white. When you walk through the forest, you might see her, and she will make a kind of sound. A laughter that resonates like ho 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 ho. Subsequently, if young men happen to see it, they must absolutely refrain from approaching, because once they do, they will be unable to return. This particular legend was only uncovered after the post concerning the bus lady went viral and transformed into an urban legend. Initially, a significant number of individuals were unaware of it, but later they discovered this legend while searching for information about the bus lady. Since there exists such a legend, it strongly suggests that the narrative shared by the original poster is likely not fabricated. He could potentially be a local youngster. Regarding whether he has encountered the bus master, that could be an entirely different inquiry. Today, I have shared with you a widely recognized urban legend known as the bus master. If you happen to see an exceptionally tall woman dressed in white emitting a frightening sound resembling bobo in the forest or any other location, please make sure to avoid approaching her. Is it that you should refrain from approaching any woman? Alright, that's everything for today. See you next time. Bye.